Hello and welcome to TBQ Live. Today Tom and I are going to be talking about men's mental health. Rena isn't joining us because she has other commitments. So it's going to be Tom and I in a slightly different format today. I'm going to be interviewing Tom on this huge topic, and we are going to put forward an idea that we'd really like to start a conversation about the fact that we believe that men's mental health issues would be of real value to discuss as a discrete and separate topic within the bigger picture of mental health issues. We're going to be exploring why we think this is the case, and we are going to start a conversation. For those of you who are new to TBQ Live, you haven't seen Tom before. For those of you who join us on a regular basis, welcome, and welcome to absolutely everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. Say hi, Tom.
Hello. Fancy seeing you here again.
Again.
Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure.
Brilliant.
So Tom was here last week, actually, or 2 weeks ago, when we were discussing music and mood. And it was because of that we decided to actually take that a little bit further and talk about men and mental health. We realized this is a very big topic that we can only scratch the surface of in 45 minutes. I'll be conducting an interview after we've talked about a case study. And we are then going to be looking at the reasons why we believe that men's mental health is a slightly separate and discrete topic within the whole big picture of mental health. So TBQ Live, for those of you who are familiar with it, you know that we stream every other Tuesday, and that we join people for the lunchtime. It's every second and fourth Tuesday. We have a discussion. It's actually based around Rena's book, The Brilliance Quotient, which was actually brought out prior to the pandemic, where she said about being an agile and versatile leader in unpredictable times. She must have been psychic because it was written prior to the pandemic. So we are here for 45 minutes. I'm hosting today. And like I said, we're going to be talking about mental health. And the reason that we're doing that is I believe, and Tom and I have discussed this, that actually there has been a pandemic in the world of mental health. The numbers have been rising. And what it's meant is that self-care has become top of the agenda more than it's ever been before. It's part of the zeitgeist now. The spirit of thinking at the moment is, let's make sure that we look after ourselves before we look after anybody else, because if we don't look after ourselves, then we can't look after anybody else. It's become more important, gone higher up in the agenda because of the pandemic, and a huge part of effective self-care is mental health. And this is because the neuroscience backs it up. 90% of brain function is determined by how we feel. It actually runs our brain without an outside of our awareness, unless we intentionally bring it into our awareness. It determines which brain systems are activated, which ones are tuned down or off, depending on how we feel. The brain is very, very much driven by emotions first and foremost. It's part of the brain's organizing hierarchy. I like to call that the boop of the brain that says, I'm going to keep us safe first, and everything else comes later. So if we feel safe, our mental health is going to be okay. If we don't feel safe, that's when we start having mental health issues. The thing about mental health is it has grown exponentially. Here are some of the really quite stunning and shocking statistics from the Mental Health Organization in England, which also is fed by the World Health Organization. It says that mental health problems are one of the main causes of the overall disease burden worldwide. What that means is most of the people being treated for ill health are being treated for mental health or ill health issues. The next statistic I find really quite amazing. Mental health and behavioral problems are reported to be the primary drivers of disability worldwide, causing over 40 million years of disability in 20 to 29-year-olds. It means that if you add it all up, all of the people who are experiencing and suffering from mental issues are taking off time from work, and if you add it all together, that makes 40 million years, because there are so many people on the planet experiencing these and challenges in their mental landscape. Major depression is thought to be the second leading cause of disability worldwide and a major contributor to the burden of suicide, a deeply, desperately sad topic, and ischemic heart disease, because everything that we feel in our head, we actually experience in our body. What we're feeling, any kind of emotional response, is actually a chemical reaction. Those chemicals go somewhere. If we are feeling, for example, anxious, my heart rate will increase, my adrenaline, my system, so that I'm ready to fight or flight, and I will be filled with cortisol. Cortisol, as we all are aware, is the stress hormone. It gets a bit of a bad rep because, let's face it, we need some stress, we need some cortisol to even get us out of bed in the morning. It's when it's overactive in the system that it becomes really, really detrimental to the cells in our body. And this is why mental health is so incredibly important and something that we feel really needs to be looked at. And what's great is a lot of people are beginning to really look at the mental health arena, and it's becoming much more popular to talk about. Is that the right word? Popular, Tom? It's becoming more easy.
Definitely, it's entering the lexicon a bit more, isn't it? I think it's one of those things. As need rises, people become happier to talk about things, and as we all become more open, we all allow other people to feel more comfortable being open as well. So as we start this journey on opening up and treating mental health in a less taboo way, of course it's gonna grow as other people feel liberated to share their own experiences, I think.
Exactly. And it's estimated that 1 in 6 people in the past week have experienced a common mental health problem. So what I would say also is there are episodes of mental health, and I want to make that distinction between mental illness, which is an ongoing chronic symptom. Am I right to say symptom? An ongoing chronic illness. And we're talking about things like split personality disorder, schizophrenia. We're talking about the more illness side of the mental health arena. But what we're not talking about is mental health episodes. And today we're going to focus on the fact that actually we all have episodes of mental ill health, but that doesn't make us mentally ill. And one of the things that I have come across in my own practice, and I have heard echo from fellow coaches, and I'm in touch with very, very many, and also some mental health practitioners, is that men actually find it harder to discuss when they're having any kind of challenge in their mental landscape. Men are quite okay to go there. I have a broken leg, please help me with my crutches. But they're less likely to say, actually, I've not been feeling okay, and there's been some triggers and some flags, and I'm not quite sure what to do about that. And that's one of the reasons why Tom and I believe that mental health for men is a slightly separate case in terms of why men find it more difficult. And we're going to go on to talk about that. But first of all, I want to talk about someone who experienced a mental health issue himself, Nick Elston. He's now an inspirational speaker on the lived experience of mental health. And Nick has done a great deal in the field to raise awareness. He actually had OCD as a child. It turned into GAD, which is general anxiety disorder, when he was an adult, but he masked it. He is self-professed at having very low confidence. So he acted as though he was super confident. He got a great job. He worked very, very long hours. He took very little time out for himself, and he experienced a huge burnout. And I've actually worked with Nick and heard his story and asked his permission if I can share some of that. And some of his story was the fact that, having spent a lot of time just suppressing and repressing how he felt, telling himself not to worry about it, not to give in to it, to tough it out, if you like, it actually came back to bite him. And what happened was, after a breakfast meeting, he went back to his car and he actually went into freeze. And people who have been observing TBQ live for a while will be very familiar with the fight, flight, or freeze syndrome. And what's great is a lot of people are becoming very familiar with the brain's overarching organizing principle, which is away from threat towards reward. And if we have any threat, psychological or physical, we go into our primal alarm system, which puts us into fight, flight, or freeze. And Nick actually froze in his car, i.e., he could not move. He absolutely disconnected from his body, and he just sat there for hours on end and could actually action nothing. And once that had happened, he didn't know what to do. He just sat there and it must have been very, very frightening. As time went on, he was able to kind of come back. Some of the chemistry that was happening was starting to dissolve. And he realized that actually the job he was in was not working for him. It wasn't serving him. He was doing 14-hour days. He was not taking weekends out to rest and recuperate and recover. He was doing what a lot of people do, which is work really, really, really hard to be really, really super successful. He stopped. He took some time out. He took a look at himself, at his triggers, what had happened. And now he travels the world. He works with big organizations like EY, Tesco's, Morrison's. I could name many, many that he's worked with. And he talks about being in those situations, about the fact that he didn't take any notice of what his body and his brain was trying to tell him. And he calls himself a big man with a big voice and huge, brutal honesty. And what he's experienced is, as he's shared his story, a lot of other people have felt liberated or had permission, because they've heard him, to talk about their own story. So one of the things that we're now going to do is I am going to talk to Tom about his story. Now, I would call you an experiential expert, Tom, because in actual fact, you have had a mental health challenge during your life. You've had a journey about it. And if you would like to share some of that with us, let's start talking about why you're an expert, because you have lived it, as well as now, and just before we do start, if you were there a few weeks ago, you'll know that Tom's actually leading up on music, mood, and mental resilience, and how you can use that to actually build some mental resilience. So that's what Tom, I call an experiential expert. Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much. As you say, I've had a number of challenges over the years in terms of mental health, and I've had a very long journey. It's something that started very young, along with, as other people do, we develop certain issues through childhood. I had a very unstable family life, and I have a number of family members who also have certain mental health challenges. And that kind of that bloomed in me in my teenage years. I suppose that's when things started to get particularly challenging. Looking for help within the system at that point, going to find support anywhere I could, really. I've got to say, I found it a massive challenge. There was no one in the system. There was no ability within the system to help in the way that I was looking for help, which is to understand what was going on and how to manage it. Unfortunately, the systemic response was Yeah, we don't really like giving labels. Try taking this medication, come back in several months, see how it goes. And it was
How long ago was that, Tom?
this would have been about 20 years ago now.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, no, we are looking at some time ago. I will say again, the perspective from a male in this situation, there was definitely a difficulty accessing the system, not just in being a young man trying to open up and explain my emotional experience, but in accessing other men within the profession,
Oh, okay.
particularly when it came to things like GPs. In those days, and I think for most of the time these days, if you're accessing mental health services in this country, you're doing it through a GP. And I remember my GP being a very old, stiff upper lip gentleman. And it was a very particular challenge to be open with someone who really did not appreciate someone being open with them.
And possibly felt uncomfortable himself, not really necessarily
looking back on it now,
the skills.
Those conversations he was. I think we were both at that point. But yeah, no, searching for understanding led me eventually to a fabulous practitioner, namely you. This would be the Grand Maria Chase, who I think I must have been about 18, 19 at this point. I've been through many different flavors of counseling. I'd gone through a number of different medications. And for the first time in my life, I came across someone who drew me a brain and explained for every emotion I was feeling exactly what was going on in that brain to cause those emotions, and giving me massive insight into how to begin to manage and control that territory. And that sparked my interest into the field of behavioural neuroscience. And I suppose it's a fusion really that I've grown along with you. It's behavioural neuroscience, it's neurology, it's psychology, it's essentially a fusion of things that we can really use to start building up, as you've got a really beautiful image there, a Haynes manual of our own physiology, our own biochemistry, and how that can be controlled and worked with in order to manage our mood and our resilience. Eventually, after a very, very long period, it took, I was 30 actually, I was just shy of my 31st birthday. After having adapted all of this and the work I'd done with you and the knowledge that I'd grown, and working with the system that I was accessing to try and get some help, I did get a final, more broader, robust label as to what is going on. Now, I describe it personally, I continue to describe this as a neurological condition. It's a condition called bipolar disorder. And that is my label, I would say, in terms of the medical system, the psychological systems. That's how I am dealt with within that system. But one thing that, from my own personal experience, I think it's really good to highlight here is that regardless of the label, there is a very big difference between what that says medically and how I and we generally as people experience the conditions of mental ill health. Be that from the general episodic stuff that we all suffer from, the situational episodes of grief and depression, to the more extreme kind of disorders, things like bipolar, schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder. And I will say that the experience is very, very different to the label. My own experience with bipolar disorder, it talks of episodes of mood instability. The label itself leads you to believe that you're talking about extreme lows versus extreme highs, and that's generally what you're working with. My own experience says it's nowhere near as flat as that. It's not as simple. It is far more complex. And I suspect, well, I know from my own practice, and I know from your practice as well, that it is always far more complex from the experience perspective. If there's, using bipolar as an example, you do have episodes of just depression. You do have episodes of pure mania, and I can describe that as quite positive and drug-like. Sometimes it is a euphoric experience, but there is also the real tangible experience of having both at the same time to extreme ends. My history, that's mostly what I've suffered from in deep episodes. It's having all of that deep, low nature of depression with all of that energy and anger of a mania, and that in itself breeds something that is, I can't describe it, to be honest. There are no medical clinical words that can adequately describe the experience of that.
I think that's such an important point, because I love the fact that you reference by having a manual, by knowing that actually which system is doing what gave you more of an insight. And I saw the almost relief, I think, on your face when someone showed you how your brain was working, and that actually it wasn't Tom. And I think that's a really important point to pull out here, is who we are isn't necessarily how we behave or what we're suffering from. The other thing that really came to mind when you were speaking is the spectrum, because I remember being slightly older than you, that bipolar initially was labeled manic depression, that there were moments of mania, that there were moments of huge depression and darkness, and that actually, like you said, you would have one or you would have the other. And what you're describing is actually on the spectrum. Sometimes if they collide, that is a lot of chemistry, a huge amount of moving around, and your mood going up and down and up and down. That must be really difficult to cope with.
Well, I mean, it really is. It's and I'm glad you mentioned the up and down, the up and down. That's something I haven't referenced. It is, instability can lead to light speed changes of mood. And I'm not just talking about bipolar. I'm talking about the lived human experience of all of us. If there's something that's just not quite right, we can shoot between the two. And as the person in the middle living the experience of this, not only is it exhausting, it's confusing, and you very easily lost in the speed of it.
Hence, excuse me, hence why I put a Ferrari on the Haynes manual, because our nerve signaling can go up to 254 miles an hour. It moves between 154 and 250 something, and basically only a Ferrari can give us a run for our money in terms of that signaling and how quickly that can change. And I think one of the things that is really worth remembering is that actually we can stand back from our emotions and watch them go, because if we're in them, they can throw us around absolutely hugely. So thank you so much for sharing that. There are so many things that we can pick up upon. One of the things that I was thinking about, though, is you were talking about how you learned to manage it. What was the kind of management like? Because within all of this, there's a functioning human being who wants to contribute, function, and have a great time, just like everybody. So I wonder if we can talk about the emotional processing model that we can go on to.
Yeah, well, honestly, in terms of learning to manage it, there is, I think one of the first and fundamental lessons that I learned about it were, it almost undid the myth of the world, the cultural narrative that emotions are the enemy of your rational decision making, right?
Oh, okay.
They're absolutely not. In terms of learning how to work with your emotions, the hierarchy of the brain is that emotions come first. Now, emotions are the only language your brain knows. They are the first thing you are born with. They drive you to learn everything else. And therefore, the rational part of you that is experiencing all of these emotions and that is being dragged through and around is very much a result of that emotional system. And even though we feel like it's an enemy of that state, it's not. So the importance of processing emotions and the importance of learning how to manage it is massive in terms of that objective person, that identity that you are in the middle, kind of being swallowed around by the winds of the mind.
I love that phrase, the winds of the mind. I think I skipped a slide. We're going to come back to that slide. I wanted to get onto this because, you know, one of the things I experienced being part of your journey was I saw how that raising of awareness, actually, hold on, what am I feeling? Yeah, rather than the suppressing and the repressing, which we'll come on to in a second.
That's it.
Is actually being aware of emotions and identifying, well, what exactly am I feeling, and experiencing it, because any emotion is a biochemical reaction. It's a it's chemistry. It's going to go somewhere, and we need to express it. So it's the expression of the emotion in a way that is safe and okay. Yeah,
definitely.
And then an acceptance of that, and then it's about, okay, I can value this. Like you were saying, that some of your joyous part of your experience can really be leveraged. I've seen times when you just grab hold of joy, you're writing poetry, you are writing music, you're being lyrical. It's a joy to watch, and I watch you experience it and live it. I think one of the things that I also have seen in you, and I think is so important when we emotionally process, I do it myself as well, is we get to choose. Once we've accepted, we then have that moment of choice. It's quoting the amazing Viktor Frankl, who was a psychologist and neuroscientist, as well as a survivor of the concentration camps. And he went through an immense amount of awful, indescribable pain and suffering, and he dislocated his brain out of that and said, between stimulus and response, there's choice. And he made that choice to not be part of what was actually going on. I mean, I can't even begin to speak to the mental resilience of someone who can, make those decisions. But there is, I think, the neuroscience does give us the opportunity to have an awareness that there is a moment of choice if we can step back.
Yeah, and I mean, expanding that by giving you the ability to know that there is choice in that there is a break between the stimulus of what you're feeling and what you do with that feeling, that breeds an inherent ability to control. It's not perfect. We will never be able to. It's that old idea of Descartes' office, isn't it? We're all sat behind the driving wheel of our minds, behind our eyes.
Yeah.
We're never going to have that level of control over it, because the conscious mind that gives us that control is a result of it. But that doesn't mean that the conscious mind that we have can't then interact with that subconscious biological biochemistry to inflict, to affect, to change.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go back to that slide which I went over, so that we really hone in for 5 minutes on why we believe that making men's mental health a discrete topic in and of itself, to then inform the bigger picture. We're not saying totally disconnect from it. We're saying, in its first instance, these are the challenges, the societal, the cultural challenges that men experience. And I'm not going to sit here as a woman and talk about that, Tom. I'm going to ask you to talk about that. I think that's much more authentic.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, just to develop on what you said there, I am wholly a believer that there is one tribe, it is just one universe on this planet. Everything is all in it together. But it can help to narrow down and frame the debate just by adding a little bit of separation. And that is why, men's mental health and ill health is a separate kind of topic to women's mental health, but they do have commonalities and there is integration. right? One of the things that makes those two things quite different is the cultural evolution of society. You know, for many thousands of years, we've played roles as our hunters gatherers on this planet, and that has kind of led to, as we've brought on the rational parts of the brain and built this modern society we live, that has led to certain cultural cul-de-sacs that we have laid down between man and woman, right, which makes men's mental health worth separating out a little bit more. There is also the more recent social evolution that we have, you know, as we have built this society, particularly with the advent of all the money and the technology that's gone on over the last maybe 70, 80 years, the routes we've used for marketing and media and myriad systems that we live by now. There is, I've kind of labeled it a certain Freudian pop psychology pressure on those roles, and that, you know, that exists discreetly for women as well, but it's here in as we're discussing men's kind of mental health, there are a number of little cultural things that we all silently kind of fall into. And I love the stereotypes you've got on the slide there. That's what society can scream at us a lot of the time. It is man up, it's walk it off, it's just that attitude that we as men can't be seen as weak or vulnerable, or even that discussing our emotions and our own internal territory is weak or vulnerable, because it's really not. It is liberating. It is sorry.
No, I was going to say, you know my passion. One of the things that I have always been passionate about, and that neuroscience gave me such a scientific basis for, is emotions are essential. Without emotions, we would not have gone to the moon, because it was passion, not rationality, that got us to the moon.
Do you know, that's the point. The rational mind is set to challenge only once the emotional mind has given it something interesting to challenge it to.
Exactly.
And it is, you know, they are intertwined and they work together. And one of the common kind of themes of men managing their own mental health and society really not helping men manage their mental health is that mental toughness aspect. It's that, you know, I can't count the amount of times through my life, be it school teachers, doctors, counselors, managers over the years, who have encountered me in an episode of real emotional kind of instability. Yeah, and they have used these. It rubs me up wrong every time, and I hate even using these words together, but it's that leave it at the door.
Yeah.
You can't, right? You literally can't. They say they leave it at the door. What they're telling you to do is try and repress everything that you're feeling in order to engage your rational mind, right?
Everything the neuroscience doesn't agree with it.
Down your rational mind, so you can't actually activate it. It is impossible to leave it at the door. And that mental toughness aspect is, you know, as I've got older, I've fallen more towards mental flexibility. And mental flexibility offers us, referring to the last point on the slide there, boys don't cry. Mental flexibility as a strategy blows that apart, because, you know, as someone who I struggled for a very long time to cry, I'd say there was a good 12 years of my life where I didn't cry. And I know from experience, talking to a lot of other men out there, they have similar experiences. It's very difficult to open yourself up, or even if they do, they have to be alone to do it. And yet now I have learned to harness the power of the good cry. When everything is feeling emotional, when everything is hard, it's not easy. Sometimes you have to tempt it out. You have to jerk it out with the right kind of sad story or music or experience.
Or film, Disney film will do it.
Yeah, no, whatever it is, right? You tempt out that good cry. You have the 5 to 10 minutes of weeping and feeling particularly sad and lonely and vulnerable. And then you wipe away that tear, and I always literally universally feel like $1 million at that point. That is the best physical and emotional feeling I get this day and age, is after a good cry. And it's only through being mentally flexible and accepting that there are myriad strategies to deal with the world, as opposed to the toughness and repression and keep it down, stiff upper lip, that you can learn to harness these supposedly negative experiences of being in touch with your emotions and having a good cry and processing it properly, you know. And to even just to a broad point, you know, mental flexibility teaches us that actually mental toughness can still be a strategy. There are times when, I mean, we all go through life and we have those little knocks in the day. You can't respond to every emotion that comes through, or you'd constantly be responding. You have to, it's the management of, you have to swallow some things, you have to repress them, you have to stiff up a lip and short them all out, right? But that is very few scenarios in the grand scheme of things. It's a minor management in a grand scheme of different tools and strategies.
And when you were speaking about the crying, the biochemical release of a cry, you know, our tear ducts literally shoot out a hormone that makes us feel better.
Prolactin is the most beautiful experience that you can give yourself. If you are really having a struggle, like emotionally grief time, try and have a cry, because that triggers a release of prolactin. And that is a chemical that literally is designed to help you deal with grief.
Absolutely.
Physically and emotionally.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's really come up for me as we've been chatting, and we could chat about this for ages, and we will circle back. TBQ Live is looking at, you know, raising the awareness. We're not talking about solutions today. We're saying process those emotions, get close to them, feel them. But also one of the things that's really come up for me is there is not one size fits all. Two things have come up actually, while I keep them in my PFC, in the front part of my brain before they drop off and I move on. One is vulnerability. Men have not been culturally, societally, even amongst themselves, but also, you know,
I'd say especially amongst themselves, in my experience. It is a male environment can be a lot harsher on vulnerability than a mixed environment or a female environment. Is just in and of itself. Whether or not that's a conscious thing,
well, the thing
is up for debate a lot of the time. It can just be the societal blokes around blokes laddishness kind of, and you know,
that bravado and that,
but it is especially amongst men. Vulnerability amongst ourselves, we come down on it like a ton of bricks.
And yet vulnerability, as Brené Brown would say, as Nick Elston refers to, vulnerability can be a complete superpower.
Oh, it is. Not can be, it really is. Accepting your vulnerability is accepting your power as well. It's true acceptance of yourself.
Because also it's the pendulum effect, isn't it? As much as I am strong, I can therefore, you know, act like a pendulum and be equally as weak. And it's that acceptance, you know, that middle arrow that says actually acceptance of all of it is the thing that takes us forward. Okay, I'm going to move us along, even though I would happily sit here for the next couple of hours and chat about this. One of the things I do want to say around all of this is it's really, there isn't one size fits all. We have separated out, actually, maybe men's mental health has some discrete characteristics, like you said earlier, that aren't the same or don't have the same weighting in terms of priority or in terms of intensity as when a woman's experiencing mental health. And there isn't a one size fits all solution. We will circle back. We will look at some solutions in another episode of TBQ Live. I am aware that this is a random topic to actually have decided upon on International Women's Day. We had actually done the schedule way before I had recognized it was International Women's Day. However, I can make quite a tenuous link, and I don't know how tenuous it is, because if we're saying that culturally men have subliminally picked up, because that's what you were saying, It's like it's not necessarily intentional that guys are down on other guys being vulnerable or over emotional. And I like to put that kind of descriptor on it: over emotional. We're all emotional. 90% of brains functioning is emotion based, emotion led. That is, like you said, when we're born, the only software we're installed with is emotions. The rest happens later. The programming happens later. But what's interesting, and a nod to International Women's Day, and I've got to say, we stand on the shoulders of giants. As a woman, I am totally celebrating the fact that there is an entire day about it. I was actually speaking to a client earlier, and I said, maybe there should be a Man's Day. And his wonderful reply was, I think you lot should enjoy the fact that actually one day only celebrates you, because you guys bring children into the world, etc. So it's got to be said that actually a man knocked me into thinking, no, just enjoy your day. So I hope everyone's enjoying the day. Obviously, when you're listening back to the recording, it won't be necessarily on International Women's Day, but I think it's always worthwhile, if the brain runs away from threat and actually runs towards rewards. Celebratory feelings are the reward side of our brains. And actually, the last slide that we're going to go to is some of the stereotypical feminine traits. We've talked about the stereotypical cultural things that men are brought up with, but actually women in a stereotypical way, and stereotypes are there for us to shorthand. This isn't every woman all of the time, but these are some of the things that we all share, is the nurturance side of our personality. We naturally nurture. We are child bearers if we choose to be. So we have a nurturing part of our brain that is much more developed than men need to have. And, Tom, you talked about evolution. There are two different male and female on the planet because we actually need both. There's sensitivity, there's supportiveness, there's gentleness, there's cooperativeness, there's expressiveness. And especially when it comes to emotional processing, being expressive is not always something that men find easy, but actually women find sometimes a little difficult not to be expressive. There's empathy, tenderness, and understanding. Now, I'm not saying these are only women characteristics. I'm saying that on, a day that celebrates the feminine, it's worthwhile looking and thinking, actually, wouldn't it be great if all of us had a little bit of all of it, so that actually we are able to really support our own mental health. Tom, I want to say thank you so much.
Right, thank
sharing
you
your story.
and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you very much. And we're going to come back. We're going to spend more time on this big subject because it will definitely be a couple of episodes that we can maybe take a deeper dive. But today we did start the conversation. So, as always, if this sparks anything in anyone, all the things we've been talking about, please reach out to myself. My email address is info@chasecoaching.co.uk. Tom's is tomfreeston9087@gmail.com. So I'm also on LinkedIn, so please get hold of us, reach out if you feel that actually, hold on, I've got something I want to speak about. Also, if you don't agree with us, that's really interesting too. Put your point across. I'm on LinkedIn, send us an email. It's great. The more we debate, the closer we come to what's useful for all of us. So in our next TBQ Live on the 22nd of March, fourth Tuesday of the month, we are rethinking technology, and we have another expert in, Christine Bakewell, who will be talking about actually how we can technology in maybe different ways. We are in a technologically accelerating world that is accelerating exponentially. So I think all of us might benefit from a moment of sitting back and thinking, okay, how can we rethink possibly how we use it? or whether it uses us. I know a lot of people feel a little bit slave to the technology at the moment. And the pandemic has made it different because I'm more on Zoom, I'm more on my computer than I have ever been. And I think that's the same for all of us. So I'm really looking forward to that one. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you.
For sharing your expertise of your lived experience. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure being here. And for those who are re-listening to the recording, thank you for taking time out. We've been TBQ Live. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much. Bye.